and condos are kind of doing that now. The difference in the condos is we collect, or our dues are $584 a year. The condos are charging $584 a month. So that $584 multiplies quite rapidly in 12 months versus we only have $584. It takes us $2,000, takes us 4 years. Once we take possession of the house, then what we have to do is we have to go in, fix up the house so it's rentable. Then we have to find a tenant, and then we have to then collect the rent. Hopefully we can hang on to the house long enough to then get back our money that we put into both the auction and the cleanup and then trying to lease it. So there's different things that the association can do, but it's a little bit more complex. Our liability isn't as great as, say, in a condominium complex where the fees are $500, $600 a month. So. Anyway, I got away from the subject, but I did want to cover that. There was a question that was addressed to actually the panelists, but we did not feel that they were able to answer it, so I'll go ahead and state the question and try and answer it for you. It said, several of us Waikoloa Village residents were debating the library land issue and realized none of us know how many acres we own as an association and where they are located. We would appreciate clarification. The Waikoloa Village Association has approximately 10,000 acres of land. Unfortunately, it's not the prime land. The developer, when they gave it to the association, basically gave you the worst parcels that were available for development here in the village. On top of that, roughly 7,000 or close to 8,000 acres is deed restricted. It's zoned for open space, and so it's limited in what can be developed on it. So if you want to go in for a zoning change, you have to get the approval from Waikoloa Land, who took over the lands and has the entitlement to the deed restrictions. The association did that for the light industrial area. We went in and for that 15 acres, or just under 15 acres that we had rezoned for an industrial site, basically we got approval from the Waikoloa Land Company. It didn't cost us though. They want a percentage of all of the rents that we want to get from it. So they're not easy to go ahead and try and get approval to change. The land that the WVA owns is roughly, there's 1,700 acres that is not deed restricted. If all of you know the demographics of the village, as you go up Waikoloa Road, there's the corner piece that is destined to be commercial now, and a shopping center wants to be built on. On the opposite side is basically the Highland subdivision. As you go up, is the location for the stables. The association owns approximately 24 acres in that particular parcel right there. The parcel that sits next to it above that is owned by Waikoloa Mauka, and across the street is also owned by Waikoloa Mauka. Those two large parcels are not WVAs. WVAs is the parcel behind the stables, and that runs all the way along the back road. And at the end of Paniolo now is Waikoloa Heights. But we have a parcel that runs along the border of Waikoloa Heights, down on the Mauka side by the well system, and then down. And so it kind of circulates the entire village. But most of that is all zoned open. We would like, and we're proposing, to try and put a high school out there on that one parcel that's close to the well system. And the reason being is Paniolo Avenue is intended long-term to go north and continue all the way to Kaihai Road. But in between that, the state has proposed a Kaihai bypass road. And so that bypass road is supposed to come from where the Waimea Airport is and go down through state and Parker Ranch land down to Kaihai. But we're hoping that by trying to get an approval for this next high school to be built out there, that would force the state to put in the bypass road and also extend the Paniolo Avenue Road. And that would basically give us our second exit out of the village. Right now we're trying to get developers to go ahead and try and pay for that, but Ainulea doesn't want to do it, Pu'uko, Tenten Pu'uko doesn't want to do it, so We have to look at alternate ways where we don't have to fund it, but the state or the county ends up funding those particular infrastructure requirements. Waikoloa Heights will be required to put in a section of it through their area, but it does have to pass through our area as well as the state and Parker Ranch on the other side. So a lot of things that the board is currently trying to do is to develop plans, and the strategic planning committee, who, if you haven't been involved, I encourage you to get involved, because they are the ones that are trying to plan the village's future out through 2030. In other words, we're not trying to look at next year, the following year, we're trying to look at 20, 30 years out to try and develop a plan of improvements, which gets us to the state library. On the Staples parcel, basically we're currently in the process of subdividing that 24 acres into 2 parcels. One parcel is 6A, that's 7 acres, or approximately 7 acres. The other parcel is where the stables is situated. Under the CCNRs, we're required to retain the stables, similar to the golf course. So the 7 acres, which is above the power line road, the power line system that runs through that parcel, kind of is a natural break in the parcel. So what we've proposed is to have we're proposing to the state to build a state library, a regional library there on that parcel. Now it's currently 7 acres. Initially they wanted 1, then it went to 2. They're willing at this particular point to re-subdivide that into a smaller parcel, whether it's the 2 acres or 3 acres that they need. If we get to that particular point, the state has allocated $600,000 to do their due diligence, as well as to plan a state library facility. Now, most of you think that a state library is one where you go, like you traditionally go to, where you went to go study when you were a kid and you had a lot of books. Well, libraries have now evolved substantially from what they used to be. Now they've become more like community centers where people go there as a community to meet, to talk about issues and do other things. They can have arts and crafts, other things. And so we're hoping to have the state library also build, and they are open to that, although we haven't received the final plans for it, a community center that will be part of the library that the community will also be able to use. So one of the conditions is that the state would like to have the land deeded to them instead of having a long-term lease. Now, the board agrees that it's favorable for us to enter into this particular conveyance of the land with a clause. And the clause is if the state does not build a library, then they don't get the land. If the state builds the library and sometime in the future they decide not to operate it as a library, the state has to deed that property back to the WDA and all of the infrastructure that went with it. The infrastructure would be the parking, would be the buildings that were there. In addition, what we're hoping, and the state has agreed to do, is to put in an intersection from Waikoloa Road that will then lead into the Staples parcel. Now, they will put in that infrastructure, the intersection, they'll put in the utilities and the water that's required. What we're hoping is that is the first stage of a potential roadway that will lead to the back of the Staples parcel, which is 1,700 acres, which is not part of the deed restricted lands. So with the 1,700 acres that sits behind there, we can look at further developing that or doing something else with it without having to get the approval of the Waikoloa land. So there's a lot of things that are going into this. We're trying to get things done that basically is funded by government programs. So the board basically hopes that you will vote in favor of the conveyance with the reversion clause that will, in the event that the state does not use that as a library, it has to be deeded back to the WDA. In essence, it's more like a long-term lease. But, you know, the state has buildings that have been libraries for over 100 years, so they're an unknown as to how long, if we did a lease, it would last. Yes.
Yeah, I'm not going to hold my breath until this gets done, but on the right of reversion, I'm going to be more comfortable with this if I know there's a time period, 10 years, 15, or whatever, and what the process is for reversion. Because here's my fear. Somewhere down the road, the state, county doesn't have any money, they keep putting off, never get any money. All of a sudden there's a chance to develop that property, get those roads, all the things you're talking about, and we're stuck on an agreement for waiting for a library that hasn't come. So I'm interested in a time period and what the process is for us to revert the land back to us if the county hasn't done anything with the state.
We can discuss that with them. Right now, they're in the due diligence process where they have to look at 3 sites. And right now, favorably, they're looking at our site simply because they don't have to buy it. Cindy Evans is spearheading the funding. So right now, they have the $600,000 which they've been drawing on to do their due diligence, and also to draft the design and the plan for the library. Once that's completed and accepted, then Cindy would like to go to the state legislature for construction funds in 2015 in that legislative process. So we should know relatively soon as to the funding, whether the funding takes place or not. So I'm sure that we can incorporate that into that agreement, so that it's not a 10-year process for them to build a state library, because we want to force them to build it as soon as possible. Any other questions? Now, some of you are wondering why that is not on the ballot, your mail-in ballot. The covenants basically state that anything dealing with the sale of land has to be determined at a duly recognized meeting called into the association. So in the past, I'm not sure how it was done, but the legal counsel has advised us that that cannot be done by vote, by mail ballot, and that needs to be done at the annual meeting. So at the annual meeting, the topic will come up for a vote, and those who are in attendance, along with their proxies, will be able to vote on that particular initiative.
Excuse me, what percentage of the people in attendance and proxies do you have to pass it?
It says that it has to be a majority of those in attendance at the meeting.
Simple.
50% plus 1.
A simple majority.
Yep. Okay.
But that's of the people at the meeting in person or proxy, which could be, it needs to be 20%.
It needs to be 20% for us to have a quorum at the annual meeting. Last year we had roughly 38%, which was a very good year. Last year's annual meeting. I want to point out another thing. We have actually 3 positions on the board this year: 2 3-year positions and 1 1-year position. So
I get the 1 year.
both of these candidates will get elected, even if they have 1 vote. The problem is that the bylaws also require that 20% needs to vote for it to be a valid election. So we encourage all of you to please send in your ballots, even if there's only 2 candidates for 3 positions.
How does the third one get filled?
The third one, which is what I was saying, the third position is actually a 1-year position. And the bylaws also provides for the board to appoint an individual to the board until that will basically be appointed for 1 year, and then at the end of the 1 year, he would have to run to fill that vacancy. The 1-year position not only coincides because it's a 1-year appointment, but also the position that's being vacated or was vacated was actually up for re-election in 2015. So it works out well for that particular individual. When that position becomes open in 2015, that will be for 3 years. Now, how does it? The annual meeting takes place April 12th. The board meeting takes place at the end of April, probably around the 25th. I don't know the exact date. At the board meeting on the 25th of April, the board will announce to the general membership that there is a vacancy on the board. Now, bylaws don't really state, the bylaws, the way it's written, states that the board can then appoint somebody. However, a prior board back in 2007 or 8, I believe, came up with a procedure. So the board will be following that procedure. At the end of April, they will announce to membership that there is a board position that's available for 1 year, and they will be taking nominations to fill that particular position from the membership. There will be 30 days provided for the membership to provide any nominees. And at the next meeting in May, the board will review all nominees and make an appointment from the list that basically have shown their desire to run. The question was posed, how do you get board people to run for the board? I think the only surefire way, and none of them answered that way, is to create controversy. Unfortunately, that's the only way that people will actually.
I disagree with that. I really disagree
I
with
know,
that.
for the most part.
4 years ago, when the meeting was over, my first year here, when the meeting was over on the restaurant, there were about 8 candidates and probably 100 people in that meeting. Middle of the recession, foreclosure, CCNRs, dried out golf course with no water on it, I mean, you name it. And that's why there were all the candidates. We had attorneys, everyone else trying to get on board. So you're absolutely right.
Unfortunately, I mean, that's what it takes. You know, the community used to be a retirement community, now it's a working community. You have a mixture of elderly as well as seniors, as well as young individuals or young families that are growing.
But Roger, I think it's because of the requirement of attendance. You have to not miss, and a lot of people are not living here full-time maybe.
Yeah. Well, there's 2 requirements to be eligible to be nominated. To be nominated, you have to either have attended 2 board meetings within a year, or